Fire is breathing. Breathing is life. Fire is life. Zuko repeated Uncle's words in his head over and over again like a mantra, but for some reason he didn't feel any wiser for it. It was nothing new to him. His first firebending instructor, a strict old woman who, Zuko was convinced to this day, hated his guts, had told him more or less the same thing. Zuko sighed and opened his eyes. He almost wished an unknown force would suddenly jump at him from the forest stretching out on all sides of their camp, but so far, no such luck. When Uncle had told Zuko he had some ideas on how to train his new skills, the prince hadn't known what to expect, but he certainly hadn't guessed boredom was a part to play. His life had lately been so hectic, he barely had time to catch his breath between all the running and fighting. Perhaps that was why he had expected that learning how to turn into a dragon would happen right away, or not at all. Which was, in retrospect, a really dumb presumption. Zuko wasn't outright bad at firebending, but he had always been a slow study, especially in comparison to his sister, and people always made that comparison. Studying bending was small part talent, but mostly just bitter work, and it seemed learning this would be no different. Uncle was convinced that, like so often in bending, controlling one's emotions was the key to mastering this new art. Something about being in balance with yourself and the universe, which in practice, it turned out, primarily meant meditation exercises. And, although Zuko was no quitter, he was starting to have doubts about whether they were going about this the right way. Yes, the prince knew learning new bending techniques took time. He understood the need to be thorough and careful. Still, Zuko had been breathing and meditating in an empty patch of wood for over 5 days, and there hadn't been so much as a strange, inhuman sensation, let alone an actual transformation. 5 days, and there wasn't a single scale or whisker in the way of progress. Their camp was a good day's travel from the colony where they had left their ship. Uncle had insisted that they take every precaution that they could think of, so they had traveled on their ostrich horses through the wilderness so long that there really was no plausible way they could come across anyone here. Uncle had advised Zuko to pack at least a week's supply of food for the both of them, and that really should have been the prince's first clue that this was going to take a while. They couldn't take all of their earthly possessions, or to be more exact, Zuko probably could have, but Uncle most certainly could not. They had instead used Uncle's position and influence to request the home guard of the colony to look after the ship. It was, after all, the guard's duty to keep crime low in the colonies, so making sure no one raided a now vacant Fire Nation ship was not only their duty but a matter of pride. Zuko was pretty sure that even if he ever lived to be as old as Uncle, he would never learn to be as eloquent and persuasive. Anyway, with a little luck, their ship would still be waiting for them once they returned. Whether they returned because Zuko had already learned all he needed to learn, or because they ran out of food, was still up in the air. Considering he had an affinity for mind reading too, it had still taken him years to come to grips with the art. There was a good chance it would be the latter. Still, maybe this would be different. Although Zuko had never transformed on purpose, he had still done so successfully twice already, and had a noticeable control over his new powers once he was a dragon. This didn't seem to be so much about gradual improvement as it was about difficulty in getting started. Once he actually got the gist of triggering the transformation, it should be smooth sailing from there on, or so Zuko hoped. On Zuko's first time around, the transformation had been almost instantaneous. Same at Pothole's stronghold. Both times he'd been very emotional, mostly desperate, but they still were by no means the only times in his life they had felt threatened or cornered. So what was the common factor? What was it that he wasn't getting? Zuko sighed again and broke his meditation stance. He walked to the edge of the field where he had set up their tent, finding Uncle fully occupied in brewing a pot of tea over a campfire. "This isn't working," Zuko began without preamble. "I already know how to breathe properly. I really do. We are not doing this right." Uncle took a deep breath before turning to face Zuko, calmly allowing, "It is possible you are right, although I still believe the key is in emotional balance. I can in no way be sure. The talent you are attempting to master is unprecedented. I am not the most qualified person to teach you something I do not and could not know myself." Unfortunately, the only original firebenders I know of live on the other side of the world. Even if we did somehow manage to find a means of transportation to get us to the Fire Nation, it would not be safe. If you were caught returning in direct violation on the terms of your banishment, you would be imprisoned. Zuko knew Uncle was right. They had had this conversation before. Still, he was tired of all the waiting. So tired, he would have just about preferred a crazy, daring trip to meet the dragons over tedious and fruitless meditation. He wanted to either do something or at the very least be on his way to doing something. Earlier when I turned, it was due to circumstances, due to having to get the power to working because it was the only way out. Maybe we should try to make me feel like that and... No! Iroh cut Zuko off before even properly hearing him out. It may be that necessity ignites the transformation automatically as a safety measure, but that can hardly be called a controlled and conscious process the likes of which we are trying to achieve. It should not have to come to a life-threatening situation before you are able to change form. Uncle poured 2 cups of tea and offered the other to his nephew, gesturing for him to take a seat next to him by the fire. Grudgingly, Zuko obliged. He didn't feel like wasting more time over something as trivial as a tea break, but it wasn't like running headfirst to go practice some more had worked any better so far. He had come here to talk to Uncle, hadn't he? So maybe he should talk. Iroh let Zuko wait a while longer before continuing their conversation. So, you do not feel that our current approach to your studies is the right one. Why do you suppose that is? Zuko hadn't expected a question. Usually when training firebending, Uncle just told him how he's supposed to do it, and then he tried and tried until he got it right. Zuko was a rather advanced bender, but not a master, so it really wasn't his place to decide how to best teach anyone, even himself. Then again, this wasn't an average bending practice. When it came to dragons, Iroh and Zuko were almost equally knowledgeable. When it came to transforming into a dragon, Zuko was the only one with first-hand experience. So he thought the question over. I don't know, he finally said. I already know that fire is the element of life. I know it can be used for destruction and chaos, but it also feels alive. Especially when I'm a dragon, actually. Then every flame and spark and being seems vibrant and alive. And when connecting with another being in a mind link, then too. So yes, fire is natural. Learning something I already know how can't possibly be the key, can it? Zuko wasn't sure if he even understood what he was trying to explain, but at least Uncle didn't dismiss of his nephew's ramblings. The old man simply nodded, looking contemplative. I think you're right, Uncle repeated. To me, personally, the most eye-opening part about meeting dragons was the revelation that fire is life. That is what the original firebenders taught me, and therefore I thought that passing on that wisdom would be the most helpful lesson for you as well. But I indeed failed to consider that you already understand fire as a more wide concept because of your unusual training history. You have always had a different, very concrete connection to our element. You are in many ways more experienced than most benders your age. Yeah, and still completely worthless next to Azula, Zuko noted bitterly. Uncle fixed a stern look on his nephew. Your sister is an exceptional bender, I'll give you that, but in a different way than you are. She is remarkably talented when it comes to learning new things, be they katas or war tactics. When learning a new firebending technique, Azula immediately realizes what the technique is composed of, when to use it, and how to execute it flawlessly. She undoubtedly has natural intuition and talent when it comes to bending, but she also worked hard to hone her inclinations and to make best possible use of them. You, my dear nephew, learn differently. For you, learning takes time and trying, because your connection to fire is different on such a primal level. What works for most does not always come naturally to you. It really isn't surprising that your bending style is one of a kind. It may take you longer to come to terms with new techniques because you have to accommodate them to your own style. Once you figure out a way to make a kata feel your own, It will not be weaker or lesser than the traditional style of firebending your sister favors. You and Azula both have your own specialties, but that does not mean one is fundamentally better than the other. And just because Azula knows more now doesn't mean you are inferior to your sister, Prince Zuko. In time, you will both be very powerful benders. Unaccustomed to such praise, Zuko felt his cheeks blush. Most of the time, everyone, Iroh included, focused on the things he was doing wrong. Aren't you the one who always trying to tell me how I'm using too much muscle and not enough breath in my strikes? Zuko pointed out, to turn the conversation back to a topic he was more accustomed to and comfortable with, such as his numerous shortcomings and failures. Iroh smiled a dry smile. Well, sometimes you lack the patience to give yourself enough time to learn something properly, and end up overreaching. But you have made considerable improvement on that account over the years. Iroh thought for a moment, his brows furrowing before continuing. I know I sometimes can be hard on you when it comes to bending, and perhaps I'm sometimes scarce with positive feedback. But surely you know that doesn't mean you are only making mistakes. As I've said many times before, only nag because I care. Zuko just nodded, still uncomfortable. It wasn't Iroh's fault the prince was a pig-headed and slow apprentice, who needed to be reprimanded on a regular basis. I just felt so frustrated. Zuko bit his lip. I don't know, learning this thing would be so hard. While we waste our time here waiting for me to pull my act together, the Avatar has either gained a huge lead on us or, better yet, has been caught by Zhao. Everything could be going wrong while all I do is waste time attempting to learn something that I may never be able to master. Zuko, Iroh sighed. I know that I suggested in the first place that you should try to help the Avatar. But I think I can safely admit that I meant you would rather try to help the Avatar than try to capture him. I first and foremost wanted you to let go of the mission your father had unwisely bestowed upon you. I didn't mean that ensuring the Airbending's safety is on your shoulders. Zuko opened his mouth to argue, but Uncle raised a hand to cut him off and went on. The Avatar is very young and prone to making mistakes. I know, but his mistakes are still his. You should not plague yourself with too much guilt over them. The same goes for Zhao, although we've agreed it would be wise to keep an eye on the Admiral. It isn't the same as making it your sole priority. But I didn't capture the Avatar like I was supposed to. If he does something bad now, of course it's on me. Zuko shouted frustratedly. Zuko, your father may have made it sound like you had to earn your worth by proving yourself. But that isn't true. You do not need to prove yourself, not by capturing the Avatar and not by guarding him from harm. I fear that even though you have come a long way, you still undervalue your own worth. Your life does not have to revolve around the Avatars. You don't have to drop everything you're doing every time you run into him. His life does not take priority over yours. Your progress is important, and the time you take to learn to know yourself is not time wasted, nor time spent away from something more important. Uncle looked Zuko squarely in the eye. You shouldn't just wait for another mission that you can throw all your attention into, one given to you by outside forces. There is nothing wrong with seeking advice from time to time, but you must first ask yourself that really important question. Who are you, and what do you want? Only after you can answer these questions can you move forward. Zuko wrapped his arms around his legs, unable to say anything. Iroh smiled and added in a gentle tone, Come now, Prince Zuko, it's been a long day. I think you've had enough training for now. How about a calming round of Pai Sho, and we can practice more tomorrow? Zuko smiled weakly. I brought food and necessities, and you brought a Pai Sho table. Uncle smiled and reached into his pack. Pai Sho table is a necessity. It had to have been long after midnight, but Zuko still couldn't sleep. Uncle is wrong. He thinks I'm afraid. Zuko glanced to his side, to Uncle's bedroll. Iroh was still fast asleep, snoring quietly. Zuko got up and snuck out of the tent. The night air was cool, but not too cold for comfort, thanks to the humid local climate. The prince could see why someone from the Fire Nation wanted to put up a colony here. It wasn't like home, but it was a decent substitute. On second thought, Zuko leaned back into the tent to retrieve his dhow. With the sword slung over his shoulder, he walked out into the field. Since the prince couldn't sleep, he might as well do something useful with his time. Zuko started off easy, just some basic moves and constant repetition. After a long day of trying to unravel mysteries of fire through philosophy, it was nice to just let go of all thinking and go with the movements. Sword fighting required thinking and planning, but on a different, more instinctual level. You had to act and react. There was no room for hesitation or second-guessing. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of becoming a dragon. I'm not afraid of change. Zuko made a quick turn and decapitated an unsuspecting flower. I can deal with change. I'm no longer just doing what I was told without even stopping to wonder why I'm doing it. I know that I could never make Father love me. I know that now. Without even thinking about it, Zuko added some heat to his side series of attacks. Not enough to set anything on fire, just adding a little extra strength. Who am I? A dragon warrior? But why? Why me? Who am I to fix everyone's problems when I can't even fix my own? Tuli chose me because she took pity on me. She saw that I was weak and that I needed all the extra help I could get to make it in life. Azula didn't need to cheat to be special. She was born that way. Zuko stopped mid-kata. He pulled back and sheathed the swords in one fluid motion. I'm not worthy of these powers. Which was a silly thought, because of course he was. He was the prince of the Fire Nation. He was born to be someone who mattered. He was chosen for this task because he happened to be conveniently available. Zuko had always been very sure of himself. He had to carry himself with pride and dignity and not show any weakness or pain. If he didn't appear respectable and intimidating, how could anyone ever learn to respect him? But did he really think himself important? Or was that just a show he put on for others so that they couldn't see how much their opinions and whispers actually hurt? Then, am I worthy? Zuko rolled his eyes. Well, that would depend on who I am, wouldn't it? It's a circular question, so maybe I should answer the second question first. What do I want? Zuko looked around himself in the dark forest and then up to the starry sky. I don't want this, he decided, taking in his surroundings and situation. As much as I enjoy a moment of quiet, simple life along with Uncle, that isn't what I want, not in the long run. Happiness is all very well and nice, but I want to have a life of meaning. Zuko supposed that was probably more due to being raised to be royalty than any specific need to prove himself. Everyone in his family, with perhaps the exception of Uncle, seemed to have an ingrained notion that they should be something great and important with their lives. Iroh probably used to have it too, when he was still a successful general. Perhaps Zuko was born that way, or maybe he was raised to believe it since an early age. Either way, it was the way he was now, so there seemed to be no reason to question that. I want to stop. I want the killing to stop. I want to go home. I want the war to end, but I'm not sure I want our side to win. I want my nation to be something I don't have to hide or be ashamed of. Not anywhere or from anyone. Zuko thought of the trust Aang had placed in him when he hadn't known it was him under the mask. Then he remembered the look Katara had given him after the first, and so far only time he'd read her mind, and shivered. Father isn't proud of me, and I don't know what Mother thinks of me. But am I proud of who I am? Zuko thought that question over in his head. I know what I want, but what have I done to reach those goals? Nothing. Because I'm afraid. Not of battle or responsibilities, but I'm afraid of making another huge mistake. afraid of wasting any more of my life on a fruitless search for something that never existed. This time the mistake would be all mine, though. I can't hide behind orders or honor. I couldn't say I had no choice. Couldn't blame my father for giving me an order or uncle for giving me a bad advice. I don't want to be anyone's puppet ever again. But the flip side is that whatever I do from here on is all on me. Zuko took a firm stance and let out a long breath. Try again, his mind instructed him. I am who I want to be. I don't know what that exactly is yet, but I am trying to figure it out, on my own. Prince, dragon, vigilante, these are all but different names for the same person. Me. I am more than any one of these things. I am all of them, all the time, and more. I shouldn't be afraid to be myself. Zuko took another deep breath, closed his eyes and concentrated, trying to reach for the ever-familiar sensation of fire growing from within him. He had many things he still needed to work out, but turning into a dragon shouldn't be one of them. I am a dragon all the time. It isn't a separate part of me. This really should work. And finally, it did. Uncle woke to a sensation that vaguely reminded him how it felt being attacked by earthbenders. Even after many years of retirement, he still couldn't entirely shake off the instinctual fear he felt toward sleeping on the bare ground. He'd seen enough people go down that way, literally. It started with a small noise, and then the whole world turned upside down. Uncle was scrambling to get out of his sleeping roll and into a bending stance when he realized the world wasn't actually tilting over. Just the tent. Nephew? He called out unsurely. A murmuring growl was all the answer he got, and the answer he needed. Uncle stumbled out from under the fallen tent, only to come face to face with a pair of dazzling yellow eyes. Nephew, you've done it! Iroh congratulated and patted his snout. All his fears quickly melted away. Zuko made a sound that was undoubtedly a dragon version of hooray, and then nuzzled his snout against Uncle's shoulder. Uncle had not had much time to acquaint himself with his nephew in this form, but if the more open shadows of affection were anything to go by, they were going to get along just fine. Or quite possibly Zuko was just understandably in an exceptionally good mood. Zuko moved a bit to the side, showcasing considerable agility for a creature his size. It took Iroh a moment to understand the gesture was meant for him. Iroh's eyes widened comically. You want me to? Zuko nodded, and Uncle wasn't going to say no. How many people ever got a chance to fly on a dragon? It turned out that flying on a dragon was overrated, at least to anyone who didn't enjoy life-threatening swirls and loops. Uncle presumed Zuko was trying to be mindful of his passenger and squirm as little as he could despite his naturally wiggly stride, but his nephew kept losing his focus every now and then. I was certain Zuko would not let him fall, or that his nephew would, at the very least, catch him if he did. And still, once they actually landed from their short first flight together, Uncle couldn't claim he wasn't happy to be back on the safety of the solid ground. I must be too old for this, he thought, but managed to smile for his nephew's benefit. Well, that was quite something. Next, I suppose you'll need to master resuming your human form.